Welcome to Africa 360, where the show that unpacks issues of continental importance, those that matter to you. If it's about Africa, we'll certainly be talking about it here on our program. I'm Chris Maruleng, and this is Africa 360. In this edition, a relationship that dates back to colonial times, where Britain called the shots in much of Africa. But the nature of this relationship has changed. Africa is no longer a colonial puppet, but rather a key economic partner of the British. This week on Africa 360, we assess that relationship as we speak to British Foreign Secretary William Hague. This and more coming up right here on Africa 360. The United Kingdom and Africa have a long-standing relationship that dates back decades. During the colonial era, it was a relationship of paternalism and indirect rule. And the continent still faces several issues because of that previous engagement with the former colonial master. But the relationship between the United Kingdom and Africa has since changed. It's now more of a partnership focusing on trade and political cooperation. And although Britain's relationship with its largest trading partner, South Africa, took a recent knock, the two countries are still working on strengthening their ties.
Today we've discussed the progress we've made on our objectives, and we've agreed our joint agenda to 2015 and beyond, including through an exciting year next year, our anniversary, as you have heard, in 2014. We've got, between our countries, we share a long and extensive relationship at all levels of society. And it's a kinship that goes well beyond politics, and the discussions we've had today reflect the great diversity of that relationship. The communique that we have agreed covers everything from basic education to business partnerships, from tackling poverty to joint projects in really cutting-edge technology, from preventing gender-based violence to the arts and cultural exchanges as well. On trade and investment, as you've heard, we agreed to redouble our efforts to maintain momentum, to expand our bilateral trade even further.
That was British Foreign Secretary William Hague speaking in Cape Town. It was the 10th bilateral meeting between Britain and South Africa to date. I caught up with Mr. Hague and I discussed a number of issues regarding Britain's relationship with the African continent, and especially the United Kingdom's concerns about Zimbabwe's recent elections, Egypt's political crisis, and London's position with regards to China's growing footprint on the African continent. This is how our conversation went. Mr. Hague, thank you so much for joining us on Africa 360.
That's a pleasure.
You are here attending a bilateral forum with your South African counterparts, and you're looking at the nature of trade and indeed the political relationship with South Africa. But my first question to you today is, how would you characterize the United Kingdom's general policy towards Africa?
Our policy towards Africa is that we are putting new energy into our relationship with Africa. We're actually opening some new embassies and consulates. We're pointing out to British businesses that many of the fastest growing economies in the world, 5 or 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world, are in Africa. That this should be a place that British diplomats, British businesses are thinking about more for the future. And the relationship with South Africa is part of that, of course, with a huge number of British visitors here and going up all the time, with British trade. We're the 6th largest export market for everything made in South Africa. So it's about building on all of that.
But the issue is here that the footprint of the United Kingdom here in Africa has become significantly reduced, particularly considering the entrance of countries like China and India, who are doing increasing trade on the African continent. Is this a concern for the United Kingdom?
Well, we want Africa to have a fuller trading relationship with the whole of the world, of course. And within Africa, of course, there are major untapped opportunities for for trade within Africa as well. That is not of concern. We want Africa to be a success, and this is not a zero-sum game where there's less trade with Britain because there's more trade with somebody else. Not at all. That's not how the modern world is. But I would take issue with you on our footprint reducing. You know, we have been the first European country to open up an embassy again in Mogadishu. I went and did that myself. We've had new embassies in Cote d'Ivoire and Liberia. I'm opening an embassy in Madagascar as circumstances permit. And so Britain is actually expanding its diplomatic footprint, and I think it's business and trading footprint as well.
It's interesting that you say that you're increasing your footprint when one of the key things that we have noted is that there have been significant reductions in aid towards Africa, specifically South Africa, which the United Kingdom has defined as a middle-income economy and therefore has decided to cut bilateral aid assistance. Why is that then?
Well, our aid will go up and down with different countries, of course, according to their circumstances. We're giving more aid to the Democratic Republic of Congo, a country that hasn't managed to develop successfully in recent decades. Our biggest aid program in the world is to Ethiopia, more than £1 billion a year in many years. And so you can see we've sent a huge amount of aid to Africa. And indeed, we are the only country in the G20, we've just had the G20 meeting in St. Petersburg, the only one in the G20 that meets the UN target of 0.7% of national income devoted to overseas development aid is the United Kingdom.
But the criticism here, sir, is that when you look at the state of aid to South Africa, your counterparts here in South Africa were particularly, or took exception to the reduction in aid to South Africa because they claim that the United Kingdom failed to understand the significance and importance of UK aid in South Africa.
Well, look, we've had some good meetings here, and at the same time, my colleague responsible for international development has had a constructive meeting with the finance minister in Pretoria. For us, this is about a modern relationship, and this is good news in many ways for South Africa and for other countries that are in that middle-income category. We want to cooperate on science, we want to cooperate on education, we want to build up our business links in so many ways. We're moving on from the aid relationship, and I think that should be welcomed by people. It's an exciting new period, so we're doing that. But where countries are still unable to get into that middle income category, we are giving them a lot of aid.
Has it strained the relationship in any way between South Africa and the United Kingdom, particularly given the very strong criticism that came from Pretoria about this unprecedented decision?
I wouldn't say it strained it overall, no, because look, this is a relationship so broad. I came here with 5 ministers today, several cabinet ministers, with the head of the British Council, with the Prime Minister's trade envoy for South Africa. But the great thing about the relationship between the UK and South Africa is it's so broad. We've got nearly 500,000 British people coming here every year. We are the biggest investors, long-term investors in South Africa from a business point of view. Now, when you have a relationship that broad, of course, there are going to be some disagreements from time to time, or something uncomfortable will happen from time to time. But it's so broad and so strong that we work our way through that. We make sure we've got good understanding in both countries. I think that's what's happening on the question of aid or in any other areas that are difficult. This is, as Foreign Minister Mashabane described it in our sessions today, a very strong and reliable, dependable relationship. And that is how the Foreign Minister of South Africa sees it. That's how the Foreign Secretary of Britain.
Another country that you have a very broad, historical, long-term engagement with on the African continent is Zimbabwe. And certainly that has raised a lot of controversy, particularly around the issue of sanctions. Many people say Zimbabwe has recently held elections which were declared by the Southern African Development Community and the African Union as being generally free and credible, indeed peaceful. Why does the United Kingdom insist on maintaining these sanctions?
Well, the United Kingdom doesn't have its own policy on sanctions. The European Union has a policy agreed among all 28 members of the European Union. So people should never think that this is just a British thing. This is a European policy. And of course, in recent times, we lifted the great majority of those sanctions, the great majority, looking forward, as we were, to a new constitution in Zimbabwe, and we hoped credible elections. Now, many different words have been used to describe those elections. They have been peaceful, and I want to congratulate the people of Zimbabwe on that, and that is a real mercy, because they've had elections in the past that were not peaceful. And so that is good. But of course, it's also clear that there were many things agreed in the global political agreement in Zimbabwe that didn't happen before the election, and we can all see how the voters' roll was not distributed and things like that. So therefore, we've had grave concerns about those elections, but we'll continue to discuss those with other countries.
Grave concerns seem in many ways to paper over what appears to be indeed serious concerns about the manner in which, at least the logistical and the organizational manner in which these elections were...
Grave means serious, yes.
Yeah.
Serious concerns, if you like, for that. You know, those that we don't see elections, you wouldn't see an election in South Africa or in Britain like that, where people didn't know who was on the voting roll or where the polling stations were going to be and so on. So yes, we have grave concerns about that. We would have liked to see an independent investigation into those irregularities before elections could be declared credible. But at all times we will have in mind, of course, the interests of the people of Zimbabwe. We want them to have a better life. Just as I think all their neighbours in SADC working with them want them to have a better life. But we can't conceal, we're honest about it, our concerns about the elections.
So what are you going to do about it, since you have expressed these concerns? Is there anything in the way of punitive measures that you are planning to take against the Zimbabwean government for what you perceive to be at least the unfairness of these elections?
Well, we'll discuss in the European Union our future approach. As I say, this is not just a British approach, this is a European approach, and with SADC and their members, of course, in this region. We await the final reports of SADC and the African Union on this issue. They, at least some of them, had observers there. The rest of the international community was not allowed to have observers there. So we will await those reports and discuss it in the European Union. I don't have any new announcement to make about that today.
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing about the Zimbabwean relationship with the United Kingdom is that times there seems to be a contradiction. On the one hand, we've heard that the United Kingdom was actively pursuing regime change. But then again, you have indicated a commitment to engaging with the government of Zimbabwe. Is the UK policy still based on regime change, changing the regime in Zimbabwe?
We don't have a policy anywhere in Africa of regime change. That's not up to us. It's up to the people of the countries concerned who governs them. And that's our only point about Zimbabwe. It should be up to the people of Zimbabwe who governs them. So under their own constitution and under the SADC guidelines, they should have elections and an electoral system that everybody can regard as fair. So no, that's entirely up to the people of Zimbabwe. The United Kingdom is in the business of building stronger links around Africa of the kind that I've described. We're not, people are thinking of previous centuries, they're thinking of the old empire.
It's not that long ago when even in the House of Commons there was a strong, vociferous debate about the need to change the government in Zimbabwe. That amounts to regime change, wouldn't you say so?
I think you find debates in the House of Commons have been about making sure people can have a free choice in their own democracy. That's what we believe in for ourselves, and that's what we believe in for other countries as well. And we're consistent about that in the British Parliament. We are critical of countries, not just Zimbabwe, where we think there is something seriously wrong in the democratic process, where we have grave concerns. After all, we're a country that I produce as Foreign Secretary a human rights report every year about 20 or more countries of concern. Sometimes these are countries allied to the United Kingdom, but we speak up about these things. So we will always do that. but we're not in the business of regime change, and we are in the business of reinforcing our very strong links around Africa for the future.
In 2011, when you came into the office that you currently occupied, you indicated that the UK's policy would be based on values, and those values would be strongly associated to democratization and human rights. Are you still committed to this, particularly when you look at countries on the African continent where in many instances these values seem to be flouted by leaders?
We will always speak up for these things, yes. We can't always bring them about, or we can't always guarantee human rights and democracy in other countries, but we can point out, as I've just been saying, where there is a problem. We can always be good advocates of democracy and good examples of democracy ourselves. So yes, the United Kingdom, under governments of any party, actually has strong values of free trade, of democracy, of a rules-based international system where countries can work together in an orderly way. I think people can always rely on the UK to champion those things, whoever is in power in the United Kingdom.
It's surprising that you say this because on the one hand, when we look at what happened in Egypt, the African Union were quick to point out that they perceived the change in government there, the ouster of President Morsi, as being tantamount to a coup. But you have come out on the other hand and said you would not take any side. That seems contradictory to the policy that you have just spoken about here.
I've said something very similar to the African Union, and indeed the South African Foreign Minister and I in our talks this week concluded our positions were very, very similar on Egypt. I said we can't support military intervention in democratic processes in Egypt. That we're not choosing a particular party or individual to support in Egypt. That's why I say we don't take a side. But I've made very clear we don't support military interventions
Why not
in
call it a
democratic
coup then?
processes. Actually, I've said in the House of Commons we can call it a coup, we can call it whatever we want. We don't have any legal problem over that. We've stopped our security assistance with Egypt. We've revoked export licenses. Again, we have to have in mind, though, the people of Egypt, who are, through no fault of their own, are in this situation. Their leaders have done some of these things. But we have to bear in mind the future of the people of Egypt, and therefore we haven't stopped European Union economic cooperation and assistance to Egypt. That would just hurt the normal people, the ordinary people of Egypt, and we don't want to do that. But we have stopped other cooperation while things are sorted out there. And we want to see Egypt, by the way, on a transition to real democracy. We wish them well with that, but it will need to be an inclusive democracy.
Even if that democratic process doesn't unfold in a way in which a government that is more amenable to the West is placed in office, as was the case with President Morsi's administration, where the will of the people apparently voted him into office.
They did, although it's impossible to deny that the people were also in favour of the measures to remove him from office. As I say, we don't approve of military interventions, but the people clearly changed their minds in Egypt ahead of having another election. But yes, this applies, even if it's governments we disagree with. That we are used to the fact in Europe that governments are elected in other countries of different political persuasions, but we work with them all the time. That is true in Africa, and in particular in North Africa as well. We will work with democratically elected leaders of other countries, provided they are not breaching their international obligations or pursuing a path of violence against other countries or their own people. Of course, there are limits to international cooperation.
Some have pointed out the fact that we've seen what has been described by some analysts as the securitization of British foreign policy, particularly in North Africa and the Sahel. And this has been mainly due to the terrorist threat that we've seen emerging in that part of the world. And here I speak of countries like Mali, where we've seen Al-Qaeda linked groups operating in that country. Is this a fair assessment of UK policy in North Africa, that it is predicated by suppressing the rise of terrorism, particularly as a threat to the United Kingdom and the West?
Well, I think all all democratic countries in the world are united in combating terrorism. Yes, we take our responsibilities seriously in that. But we see that as part of a comprehensive approach that also brings development and a better economic situation to many of the areas involved. For instance, we have really been spearheading diplomatically the work on Somalia, to stabilize Somalia, to help Somalis recover peace and development in their own country. We've put a lot of British resources into that. We are not to the same extent in the diplomatic forefront on Mali, but we're very active on that. We work closely with France and other countries on that. So yes, this is partly so that terrorism doesn't take hold, but that's in the interest of those countries concerned, the people of those, not just our own interests. And it includes trying to make sure that there are economic opportunities in those countries as well. It's got to be a good thing for European powers or countries to be playing that role.
Now, one of the other pressing issues that African governments are currently focused on is the issue of Kenya, and most recently their decision to pass through their parliament legislation that would allow them to leave the Rome Statute, the International Criminal Court, in essence. And this is following the recent indictment of high-level members of their government. What is the United Kingdom's view on this, considering your strong links to that country?
Well, we do have very strong links with Kenya, again, in so many different ways. They've had a vote in their parliament, but as I understand it, that's not been something promoted by or approved by, at this stage, the Kenyan government. So I think we will await developments in the Kenyan parliament and government. I don't want to react to their government just because the parliament has voted in a particular way. We're strong supporters of the International Criminal Court and its work. That is well known. But I think we will await developments.
But you must say it augurs badly as a sign for governments in Africa that are against contraventions to human rights, to what have been described as crimes against humanity, grave crimes against humanity, particularly during electoral processes. What is your view on this?
Well, it's what I just said. We're strong supporters of the International Criminal Court, but the Kenyan Parliament has passed a motion. The Kenyan government has taken a different position. Our relations are with the Kenyan government. We've discussed with them the importance of cooperation with the International Criminal Court, as we would with any country in the world. So I'm not going to react in any additional way to that.
Do you think this augurs well for the entrenchment of democracy in Kenya, given the fact that they have decided to react in such a way?
That's for Kenyans to decide.
And what do you believe would have been a more appropriate response to such an impasse?
We want to see Kenya cooperate with the ICC, which Kenya is doing at the moment. So I have nothing more to say on that at the moment.
I see. Now, one of the other issues that we've noted, particularly in terms of UK policy, has been trade and investment. Many African countries believe that they are better off looking east because they believe that trade relations and indeed sometimes overseas development relations with the East don't come with the sort of conditionality that the United Kingdom has often placed on its development assistance. What's your view on this?
There's no conditionality on British development assistance, which is different from many other countries, but there's no conditionality on that at all. Our development aid is given irrespective of politics. It's given without any conditions attached to trade with the United Kingdom. It comes very straightforwardly as part of the belief in good development from the British people. So if they held the view that you say, they would need to find out the facts of the matter.
So you do not agree that very often your overseas development assistance is attached with conditions related to good governance and other such provisions, yet when you look at...
we do promote good governance.
Therefore, isn't that a form of conditionality?
But no, I thought you were talking about conditions attached to you have to trade or you have to buy things from the United Kingdom and so on. Not at all. We don't attach precise conditions to aid even in those terms, but of course we're better able to give aid, we can more effectively give aid to countries that have good governance structures in order to be able to use it well. But on your question about should countries in Africa look east or west, they should look out to the whole world, of course. Again, this is not a zero-sum game. It's important for us all to be connected with the fastest growing economies of the world, but it's also important to make the most of these tremendous people-to-people business, scientific and educational links, of which the UK and South Africa are a good example.
William Hague, thank you so much for joining us on Africa 360.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
That does bring us to the end of this edition of Africa 360. We'd certainly like to thank Britain's Foreign Secretary, Mr. William Hague, for having been our guest on Africa 360. If you would like to leave a comment or join the debate on our continent, you can find us on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter or drop us an email on africa360@enca.com. And remember, you're more than welcome to give us suggestions on topics you'd like us to cover on your next upcoming program, that is Africa 360. So until next time, when we look forward to bringing you Africa like you've never seen it before, do take care.